What's up, everybody? It's Dani Stern for DCScrack.com, bringing you another 6 Max Zoom video. This time I'm playing 1-2 No Limit. As always, already playing, so I'm going to get right into it. Top right, I have King Jack suited on the button. Hijack open. There's no real reason to 3-bet this, I don't think. I think the hand's it's sort of good enough to call, not necessarily good enough to 3-bet with for value. If my hand's a little bit worse or a little bit better, I would frequently 3-bet it. And as always, when you're in position, there's a lot more room for finesse and playing a little more passively and calling and not raising. So I'm going to try to take it away on that turn card or on that flop when he checks. It's this type of flop that I expect a lot of people to check fold. 6-8-9 rainbow. Bottom right, I have 6-4 suited. In my opinion, this hand's just not really good enough to be 3-betting out of position, though I expect some of my opponents do it at a rate that I think is not good. I probably for one gappers wouldn't start until they got a decent amount bigger. Top left, clear open. I would have called if Giuliani had opened. Top right, ace-4 suited under the gun. I'm going to open it specifically at this table. The cutoff, you guys can see his stats. That's reason enough for me to make a very marginal open under the gun. Usually, I tend to just sort of focus on how the button plays when I decide whether or not to open a marginal hand under the gun or under the gun +1. But if there's a really bad player in the mix, I'm going to be much more likely to make marginal opening. Of course, I'm not opening, like Jack-6 suited under the gun here, but my hand is good as ace-3 suited. I can afford to make the marginal open. For the most part, I don't expect my opponents to instantly decide I have a much wider than normal opening range if they see that there's a fish at the table. But I definitely have seen that with certain players in the past that they will adjust to that, and if that's the case, I will adjust accordingly. And if they start 3-betting me a lot, I'll obviously just 4-bet more. Bottom left was a bad open, given who the button was. A regular who 3-bets a decent amount. Top right, my opponent, he just donked out of the flop. I'm going to raise a4. I mean, I have pretty shit hand. I have bottom pair, but I have 8 of clubs in my hand, and there's a good chance he had nothing for just donking out there. So I decided to just give it a go. And Raising Confused is playing, I think he's playing, he doesn't want to be found, but I'm pretty sure he's playing 4 tables of 1-2 and 4 tables of 2-5. So, I mean, not like I expect him, he's like, playing like shit or anything because of that, but just, he's busy right now. I'm going to overbet in this spot against him. I think it's credible that I would make an overbet in this spot with a bluff. Trying to, because if his most likely hand is a jack, it's going to be pretty tough to get him to fold a jack by just betting 2/3 pot. So that for that, I think at least I think that's how he would perceive it. Maybe he would fold, but I think he'd perceive that that's how I would think about the situation, and then maybe I would bluff kind of big. Maybe that would be a better spot just to overbet bluff and just bet smaller with my hand. So obviously even the balance. I get 3-bet with 10-7 suited. I'm gonna fold, and I'm pissed about it. 10-8 suited, I wouldn't fold. 10-7 suited, I fold. I don't think I need to 4-bet my hand there. You know, I say in a lot of situations, sort of as a template, as sort of a starting point, that the worst hands that you just barely can't call, or the best hands that you just barely can't call with, tend to be the best hands to bluff with. And while it is for the most part true, it doesn't mean that every time, like if you would have called with 10-8 suited in this spot, you have to bluff. You have to 4-bet with 10-7 suited. That's not exactly what it means. I'm talking about, in a game theory balance, if you're playing against game theory conscious opponents, that's something you should be thinking about. Against people who have super exploitative ranges in that spot, you obviously exploit them best by being exploitable yourself. Not that folding 10-7 suited there is necessarily exploitable, but I think my point is clear. So I raised under the gun here. My opponent called, and I check called on this flop with Queen Jack of Hearts. Basically, when he has something worse than my hand, he has a low pocket pair, or he has just nothing, he missed the flop completely. He's basically drawing dead, right? He has like nothing compared to what I have. If he has a better hand, he's never folding. So there's just that reason for playing it my way. But then there's also just the fact that it is very deceptive to have a queen high flush in this spot, because my opponents, if a heart comes, they would correctly assume that I hardly ever have a flush when I check call the flop, because there's just not much reason to check call something like a naked flush draw or a flush draw with no pair. I would almost always be betting that on the flop, and they would be corrected in making that read. So I expect that by checking with my hand there, I to create a nice implied odd situation for myself. I'm making kind of a small 3-bet here, 4-bet in top right. Against somebody who 3-bets a decent amount. This is a spot where I expect him to 3-bet a decent amount. I should call it the bottom right. As always, you'll hear me say this a million times. I 4-bet there with 9-10 suited. Even though I thought it was a good spot for a 4-bet, you're still not going to see me 4-bet with like total garbage, because you can still call. So you want to have a hand, at least pretty good hand, like 9-10 suited. So top right, get small 3-bet, and I have 6s. Now ordinarily, small pocket pairs in a spot where I'm getting 3-bet, I'd like to be the aggressor out of position with a hand like a small pocket pair, but he's 3-bet so small, and he's probably fish, so I don't think it's bad to just call with a 3-bet with a small pocket pair. Ordinarily, blind versus blind, I, for the most part, would try to find a way to do something aggressive with pocket 6s. No real reason to bet, I don't think. On the top right, I don't expect him to ever fold a pocket pair or a bigger pair on the turn. I'm gonna 3-bet raise and confused with 8-9 suited. He opened under the gun, 3-betting him the button. So I'm calling in top bottom left, because even though this guy only has one hand, He's from Brazil and has a ridiculous amount on his stack, so I think it's more than likely that he's not going to be good. So I'm going to take the risk that my read could be completely off and call pre-flop. And the other reason I called and didn't 3-bet pre-flop is the guy in the big blind is playing 15-15, so I think I can get away with calling. In retrospect, I think I should have checked the flop with my 8-9 hearts in the bottom right. I think it's an okay hand to check this flop with. I want to mix it up sometimes with a hand that has some showdown value and check on this flop. I don't want to only just check when I have like 10s to kings or something like that. Top left, king 10 off. I think it's just barely not good enough to go for a 3-bet there. Queen 4 off, bottom left. I mean, when I say I play ridiculously loose in this spot, I mean it, but maybe queen 4 off is just a little bit too tight. I mean, a little bit too loose. I know I say I play super loose, big blind or small blind when they open there, but it's just a little bit too loose, I think. This is a spot in the bottom right where I just feel like I'm supposed to call because of how the board ran out. But in reality, I don't think I am good very often. I mean, I'm going to call. I have so many draws. I do have a lot of flush draws here I could have missed, but is there a chance that he got the same hand as me? I mean, from Russia, this might just be a bad call. I expect him to mostly bet twice with his hands that make a full house on that river, obviously. Yeah, that was just a dumb call. I'm going to raise my opponent on the river here. I think he hardly ever has me beat when he bets the minimum on the river. Well, sometimes, even though it doesn't seem like you can beat much, you just have to call on the river versus fish, getting 5-1. Well, he did bet the minimum with pocket sevens. There's just certain spots where you sometimes just call because, hey, he could just be doing something really dumb. And I think that was just one of those spots where I just kind of have to throw in some chips and see what he has. I like how he made sure not to get in his last like $4. Wouldn't want me to fold. I decided just to call. This spot, this guy's a high fold to 3-bet, so I don't really need to 3-bet ace queen. I can 3-bet junk and accomplish the same thing since he's usually just going to fold. You know, against guys who do have high fold to 3-bets, be careful that you don't value time yourself by doing stuff like 3-betting ace queen when they open under the gun. That's a spot where I would 3-bet against most players, but against those who tend to be on the sort of higher end of the fold to 3-bet spectrum, I think calling with ace queen and 3-betting really crappy aces is okay. I I mean, the beauty of playing against people who have overly high fold to 3-bet percentages is that you get to play all the same hands. You get to play ace queen against them and all the other hands. You get to play really, extremely loose. And a lot of those hands that you might 3-bet, you shift and you start calling against them in position, especially when it's heads up. Some of the value hands that you want to take a flop against them with. But then if they do fold to tons of 3-bets, it allows you to play even more hands profitably because you can just start 3-betting them with, stuff like ace-7 off in a spot where I probably would never ordinarily 3-bet anything worse than like ace-10 off. I'm going to raise queen 8 on the bottom left. I don't do this very often because I don't really think I'm representing all that much, but I am representing, 7-9, 9-10, pocket 9s. And I'm all, obviously you always hear me talking about in the video, think about what you represent. Think about your range versus their range, not just your hand versus, versus their range. Think about your perceived range and how your hand fits into that range. I talk about it all the time, and I think that it's really important to think about all those things. But on the other hand, sometimes people just fold too much, or they just call too much, and then you just play your hand in a vacuum and try to win the most amount of money possible. And not to say that you're not always trying to win the most amount of money possible, it's just that in 6-max, a lot of time you're playing on unknown information. And the best way to compensate for that is by playing an overall strategy that combats all your different unknowns in the same way. So I raise that turn there with queen 8, but not with 5-4 or whatever, because I have no idea what his folding equity is on that turn. We can estimate it might be something between he might fold there something between 30 and 50% of the time. So having an 8 just becomes that much more important there. Having no equity just makes that play that much worse as like an overall game plan against your opponents. And obviously that's a really obvious situation, but it applies everywhere else. Oh, and I was thinking about that hand. Never mind. That's from last week. I should make it 16 top of, not 17 to X open. I flattened the top left with king jack off to a min raise. No brainer check call on this flop. I have some showdown value. I have a gut shot to the nuts. I have backdoor clubs. I'm going to bet to get him to try to get him to fold his pocket pairs. So because of that, I'm betting kind of small. 9. I think in theory, betting in that situation, even smaller, like betting 4 or 5, should work, but it just might not. Like the problem is, I think he should fold to like a 1/4 pot bet there with like his random third pair, pocket pair type stuff. But I'm afraid that he might just click call because he's like, fuck it, pot odds. So because of that, I think I make a bet that is bigger than I would like to make in theory, but in practice it might work better. gonna do something tricky. Top right. I think that he blind versus blind is super likely to bet most of his queen X hands, and I think if I bet, he's calling with almost all of his 2 pairs, but if I go for the check raise, I have the opportunity to get his whole stack. He checked. Obviously, it's going to happen some of the time. I think he folds a 10 often enough that I don't have to bet to get value from it. Obviously, against that hand, better off checking, unless for some reason he would raise that on the river. I think him checking that hand on the river is... Unless he got spooked or something and thought I might have gone for a check raise, unless that was the case, I think for the most part that's a very bad hand to check on the river. I think that's one of the only ways he can get to the river and be bluffing. Okay, and I can get to the river and just randomly have 3rd or 4th or 5th pair, and I check and he checks and I win the pot. Or I can have ace king, and we check and I win the pot. There's a good chance that if I had absolutely no showdown value, I would have raised. Or I would have bet the river. I think checking back that ace jack there is really bad. Again, unless he, for some reason, thought my check looked suspicious. Which I'm not saying is impossible. Top left, I just call a 3-bet and then call the flop and raise the turn. Just dumb cooler for him. Bottom left, I squeezed and then hit this flop. And we got it in. Good session for me so far. I mean, I might bet twice there with ace 10 and then check fold the river in that the hand where my opponent had ace jack and check back. Truth is, his ace high is just not that much showdown value there, and that's what it comes down to. So I call the open here, pocket eights, I flop top set. I just call the flop. I mean, I can definitely raise some flops, sometimes a top set, but 8 deuce 3 when I have pocket eights, it's just like it's just begging to be slow played. And for the most part, I raise the turn here. I'm thinking about doing something tricky though. Call the turn, raise the river. I kind of like letting myself get to the... Basically, I think it's just extremely deceptive to have pocket eights in the spot since I think he expects me to raise a set before the river. With good reason. I probably do it most of the time. I just like mixing it up a little bit here and trying to get a set in this spot, and obviously just super cooler for him. That's unfortunate. And you know, him having that hand sucks for my hand, obviously, for my line, because I lose value on a lot of rivers. But I also think he has enough double barrels that I can just raise, or I can just call the turn. Again, keeps bluffs in. Sweet session for me so far. I actually went this well at 2-5. So I squeezed, or squoze, as some idiot online players would say. And check twice on the bottom left with Queen Jack. Betting the river, it just seems impossible for me to be beat. He would have bet at some point with an ace. I raise pre with ace 10. I'm going to check. I think it's important to have some aces when you check here. Maybe checking with something like ace 10 to the 10 of spades is better than checking with my ace 10. but I'm not convinced that it's important enough that I should never check my hand. Maybe I should check again also, given that keep my line a little bit more consistent, but it probably doesn't look like I have an ace too often when I just bet the turn, so. And then he min raises. I mean, I'm just literally never folding here. I'm snap calling any river bet, basically. It's just almost impossible for him to have me beat unless he has some funky 2-pair or something. I think he should raise big on the turn if he's going to raise, since it's so much more credible that he has 2-pair or set or something. He raises big. If he min raises, it's just I can't fold. Although at least he has the right idea that he kind of has to raise the 6-eye flush, his 6-eye straight draw with no showdown value. Ooh, top 2-pair, not a bad hand. I'm gonna do something tricky. Go for a check raise here. I kind of like going for check raises in this spot against like a random opponent who might bet hands he's sort of not supposed to. You know, he might bet a queen. Once I get to this turn card, I'm definitely going to check because I think he'll bet a lot of his diamond cards and go and call a check raise. If he has something like a king that he play pocket draw with, it's definitely better to go for a check raise. Bottom left, I'm going for a second barrel against this opponent with fishy stats. He just has way too many a6 hands, like ace 7 or something. I got raised on the river. That is silly, considering other nuts. Well, I guess that wasn't too hard to predict. I'm betting just a nice standard amount in the lower left. Nothing too big, nothing too. I think too big is just going to lose value from whenever he has like an ace 8. Too small. Again, same thing. We'll lose value, and then he'll still call, but he won't get as much money from him when he has those hands. Top left, I mean, I am certainly not in the business of folding to 3 bets with ace jack from the button versus big blind, but he just bombed it, so I guess I'm just going to fold. He doesn't have that much behind. I don't think I'm ahead of his range really there, and my position is just not that important. I mean, it's important. It's good to be in position there, but it's not important enough. I'm going to go for 3-bet, 5-bet against raising confused in this spot. I think it's a spot he will 3-bet enough, 4-bet enough, I should say. This is an opponent I would frequently jam on here, but my only fear is that we're a little bit deep, and I think he doesn't have quite the same range. Or it's not even that he doesn't have the same range, it's just that I'm risking a little bit too much, I think. My risk reward becomes a little bit worse when we're not just straight 100 big blinds deep. You know, when we're 120, 120 big blinds deep there. I just think I have to risk a little bit too much to jam. That is a spot I would frequently jam with my hand that doesn't necessarily look like a good jamming hand, but it just becomes a little bit worse when it's that exact stack size. So we got another 10 minutes or so in this video. Not quite as much action as I had hoped for. Like last week, I think, which I recorded an hour ago, I felt like there was more going on for that quick session. I wish there was a little bit more craziness happening. So I'm going to just flat pocket jacks here on the top right. My opponent has very nitty stats through 27 hands. Certainly not a spot I would usually just flat jacks. I would 3-bet it quite a bit, but obviously it's nice when you flop top set in 2 hands. Bottom left, I don't think cold calling here is necessarily wrong. I just don't really have much of a cold calling game. It's not that I really think it's necessarily wrong with my hand in that spot. It's just that I know that I can profitably cold 4-bet Queen Jack suited there, so I just do it. Plan in the top left for the most part is going to be check call, check raise. With this hand, I think. I think I'm still going to go for a check raise. I think there's some chance that, well, first of all, I just don't think he calls ace high if I bet the river, and there's a good chance that he'll bet the river with something like 7s, or maybe his slightly smaller pocket pairs he might check. Like he's going to check 5s on the river a lot because he expects me to have a lot of pocket pairs. But I think some of the slightly bigger ones below a jack, he'll tend to bet. And plus, it's just nice to be able to try to get a raise in. Wow, he checked 8s. I mean, if I know he checks 8s, obviously I just probably bet the river. I should check raise a flop or something. I mean, it's a reasonable check when you consider, like, I'm not flatting pre with that many worse pocket pairs. And I might just fold them, honestly, on the river versus him specifically. That check is certainly more reasonable than his check from earlier in the session. He had just the ace high and definitely should have bluffed. As a general rule, I'm not calling here with ace high too often. But he bet a bet size that makes me think he's pretty polarized and will have just like a king or nothing a lot of the time because he has kind of fishy stats, so I'm going to call. And he had queen high. I mean, when he bets kind of big there, it's sort of, I wouldn't say it eliminates stuff like second pair from his range, but it's certainly, in my mind, in that situation versus that type of opponent, lessens the chance that he's going to have a wider range. So that's the type of spot. Now, obviously, normally, somebody bets small, I'm going to be more likely to call than if they bet big. But in that specific spot, I ended up calling because he bet big, whereas if he had bet small, I would have folded because I could think he could be value betting more hands. And so that's going to be a concept that you want to apply to your bluffs as well. And there's going to be certain spots where betting smaller is actually better as a bluff because suppose, you're trying to get your opponent to fold top pair on like a very crazy, draw-heavy, messy board. If you bomb it, a lot of time you're going to look like you only have like, a straight or a flush or something or nothing. But if you bet kind of small, you might look like you can also have 2 pair, and you'll get your opponent to fold his 1 pair hand just as often, if not more. I didn't really look at the stacks in the top right because I was talking, but I definitely should be 3-betting to a bigger size there. Top left, I'm going to go for a check raise because the stack sizes. Absolute monster flop for me, obviously. No real point checking. I mean, I have to give myself an opportunity to stack one of these idiots for 300 big blinds. I don't know why I call them idiots. That's just not nice. A lot of time, I might do something like check top set in 3-bet pots, like 100 big blinds deep or something like that, just because, if you sometimes check strong hands, a lot of time top set is going to be one of the best hands to do it with because you're blocking any of your opponent's possibilities of a strong hand. Bottom right is super marginal. I guess I'm calling because I have a gut shot. If I had 7-9, I would check fold. If he's just betting, if he's betting his queen X's on the turn, it becomes worse. But a lot of people would check queen X on the turn there, so it's part of the reason I called. Gonna open 10 it off in the top left with a semi-nitty button. He's not like a nit or anything. And it's sort of like I talked about in the last video. Definitely try to identify the difference between, just a nit like some guy who just doesn't play enough hands and is just killing, just hurting himself by doing that, versus the regulars who are on the nitty side. This guy's definitely just like a regular on the nitty side. Still, I get a pretty damn good flop from my hand, a very deceptive double gutter. And pretty much once this king of clubs comes out, I know I'm bluffing almost every time on the turn and almost every time on the river. Maybe on certain runouts I'll give up. I was thinking about overbetting the turn, but it's kind of like the concept I was talking about before. I don't necessarily want to polarize my range here. Because I'm trying to get him to fold a queen, I want it to look like I can have ace, king, king, jack, king, 10, maybe even like, ace, queen still. If I bet big, it might look like I only have, king, queen, or 10, jack, or something really strong. Definitely certain runouts are mandatory bluffs, and I'm pretty sure this is one of them. I think he literally always folds a queen on this board runout. But I don't expect him to fold like 2-pair ever, so I kind of like betting semi-small here as a bluff. I want it to look, again, this is the same concept. I want it to look like I can have a wider range of value betting hands. If I can have, if I can be betting king jack here, it looks like, this bet size, I want it to look credible for having that. Of course, against a lot of opponents though, when you do that, you run the risk that they will both value raise lighter and be that much more likely to bluff. I have no idea if either of those things are happening right now since I don't know what he has. But I'm going to go all in. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to fold. Honestly, going all in that river wouldn't have been like the worst thing in the world. I think I need a pretty good reason to believe that he was bluffing to go all in on that river. Or that he would ever, it's not like I always expect him to raise fold that many flushes there. And a lot of his flushes are going to be nut flushes. So, or at least, jack high flushes. So raising the river there would be pretty psychotic. I'm going to raise the ace 10 against this opponent with his fairly fishy stats. Not a great turn card, but certainly good enough to keep betting and pretty much never fold. Maybe if he raises the turn, I consider folding. But certainly good enough to just bet the turn and always jam on a brick river. Not jam, but bet. Jack is basically not worst card in the deck, and I am check folding this hand to basically any bet size above $10. He bets 11. I suppose I should feel like he let me off the hook there a bit. Not raising the turn. Still, actually, I like his play, probably. Yeah, I think his play is fine, because then he can raise a blank river, although he probably wouldn't have. My opponent raised on the bottom right on the flop, and I actually have a plan of calling and then donking on brick turns. But on this specific turn, I think check calling is best. I think when somebody raises that flop, a lot of times they're going to have pocket sevens or something, and they're trying to get you to slow down. I'm checking on the top left because I don't think I can get him to fold pocket pairs often enough, and I don't think I can get him to fold even like ace 5 often enough. Bottom right, now that I took this line, I'm definitely just calling the turn. This guy has very crazy stats through a very small sample size. Like 60-50 with 100% 3-bet. So I'm not going to fold. I know it's a really small sample size, but yeah, I'm just not folding. It's a small sample size, but, well, he had quads. At least my flopper, he was right that he had something like sevens a lot. I know I don't beat that much there, and a lot of time he pretty much has to have just like a naked bluff there, since he probably doesn't have jacks or tens. But when you're playing against a guy with like ridiculous psycho stats, even if it's through 15 hands, sometimes you just get to that river with queens, and your hand is just too strong in absolute value because there's always kind of the idiot factor. He's just doing it with some random hand he should never have. And I still was semi-confident in my flop read that he has a hand like sevens there, and there's just a chance that he's being dumb and just betting just betting too many streets with something like sixes, or just has a random bluff. Certainly against good opponents, hand runs out that way, I'm pretty happy folding the river. Against some crappy opponents, though, I'm just much more likely to be a station on the river in that spot. Top left, my opponent raised, and he checked that flop, and I decided to bet. Man, I am gonna make this fold in the top right. I hate folding tiny 3-bets when we're deep, but we're out of position, so us being deep is not exactly great for me. And I have like one of the only hands that just plays awful in that spot. Ace-10 off is just terrible there. I would never ever fold a suited ace to that 3-bet when he makes it such a small 3-bet. But honestly, my fold to 3-bet in that situation when he 3-bet me there was probably like 7% or something. There's just not much of a way you're getting me to fold by making it 18 there. Though I did happen to have one of the only hands it would get me to fold it. And the reason I open ace-10 off under the gun, I know I've talked about how that's sort of like right in the middle hand for me, is I just thought the players behind were semi-nitty, so I decided to open it. Top right, in position, I sometimes would do something aggressive on this flop. I tend not to do it though without a heart in my hand. King-queen with a heart, I might float or raise that flop. Crazy guy on the button here, but I'm opening my queen-10 off anyway, just because I'm not like upset if he calls really pre-flop. I can just play, and if he 3-bets, I can 4-bet. Against most people, I would be hesitant about 4-betting queen-10 off this deep, but I just think he has tons of absolute garbage that I can profitably 4-bet it, and if he calls, I can just make some decisions post-flop. I'm okay with betting once. I think since my general plan on this board texture is betting once with queen-10, because I don't have too much of a barreling hand, I think because I'm probably only betting once, it might be better just to bet big on the flop. A lot of times, if you're going to set yourself up for multi-barrel bluffs, betting small can be good. But if I know I'm not going to go for another barrel, it might be best to just maximize my fold equity right now. I made a very loose call here on the top right. It's usually 3-betting it for me in this spot against this opponent, this type of opponent. Super nitty. But I don't know, I could probably check raise that flop actually. King-7 on ace-jack-9. That might be good enough hand to check raise it. So that's about it for this video. I'm going to start sitting out. It's been about 45 minutes. I think at the end it picked up a little bit, got some action, but I think last week maybe came out a little bit better. But see what you guys have to say. As always, I want you guys to participate and post questions and comments and criticisms and praises and whatever you want. Play out some of these last few hands. Top left, opponent 3-bets me. I have king-10 suited. You'd have to pry this hand from my cold dead fingers to get me to fold it blind versus blind. Certainly a strong enough flop that I'm looking to check raise and get it in on the flop. Obviously, a lot of situations where you have top pair and your opponent can have potentially strong range, you want to keep in his bluffs and just call in the spot. But blind versus blind, I think he's basically never folding any kind of a good draw here. He's never folding even like 7s or 8s or something, I don't think. And anytime he has a 10, he's getting it in. I mean, he haven't had jacks. I'm pretty happy getting it in there with my hand, though. Bottom right, I have the nuts unless he has 7, 8 of clubs. I don't think I want to bet too big here. I think it's a pretty easy fold with a lot of clubs. I would bet I would bomb it against a fish who's just like would never consider folding like the 10 of clubs here. But against somebody who is really nitty stats, I think he's more than capable of folding King X or something, or Queen X of clubs or something. So I don't want to bet too big. Bottom left, kind of just like a bet fold situation with kings. If your opponent raises here, a lot of times he's just gonna have 2 pairs set, or if he has something worse than that and he's bluffing you, it's really shitty. But it's very hard for you to call and play rivers. So. And it's definitely a spot where I'm betting the river, but I mean, I have to hope he calls with 1 pair and doesn't jam on me with 2 pair or set. All right, well, that's it for deucescrack.com. This is Dani Stern. I'll see you guys next week.